Guess we'll go ahead and get started. We are so thrilled to have you all here. I know most of you, but I'm Sherry Williams, and I am the library director here downtown. I teach the FYE class, one section, but last year I was fortunate to be certified as one of the college trainers in the AHA process material, including the material about under-resourced college students, and so this has been something I've spent a lot of time focusing on in the last year. My colleague, Barbara Ashley.
I'm not certified, but I am certified. What was Ron that said?
Definitely certified.
I think it was Ron that certified me.
Yeah.
But I'm your PD coordinator. I teach sociology at the Southwest campus, and we began this journey looking at our under-resourced student population a couple of years ago when the PD committee was assigned to develop an intervention, develop a comprehensive program on Jefferson's under-resourced students. And I think it's been one of the best things, one of the most helpful things we have done, and Sherry's about to tell you why.
Okay, before we start though, I know that there are a couple of faces here that were new to me, so why don't we just take a minute and just have you all say who you are and what you do at the college. David?
I'm David Mangum. I teach I'm the department head of English as a second language here at downtown.
Ron Walford, I'm in psychology and human services downtown.
Annie Lott, English department, downtown. Lisa Eichholz, downtown library. I work for Sherry. With Sherry, whatever.
I'm Jamie Bevan. I work for Sherry too.
Lisa?
Lisa Hillis. I teach reading here at the downtown campus.
Renisha Griffey. I work for the UPS Metropolitan College Program and the Cooper Center in the JC building.
Joy Williams. I work at the same place. I'm in the recruiting. I'm the recruiter for the program, and I'm also a student development counselor as well.
Nina?
I'm Nina Dealey of library, downtown campus, and I work for Sherry.
Okay. And
I'm Jeffrey Monroe. I'm an IT coordinator.
so he is capturing this on video today, and it'll be posted on the web page for those who can't be with us, or if you wanted to go back and see it later. Okay, so we'll go ahead and begin. Barbara mentioned why do we do this? So we're going to start out by looking at the population of our students here at Jefferson, and hopefully that will give you some insight into why these planning skills are sometimes absent and also, of course, very important. 24% of Jefferson students receive some kind of federal aid. When we talk about under-resourced students, they're actually, according to the AHA process, they've developed 11 different categories of resources, and financial resources, finances represent just one of those resources, but it is a resource that often our students here at Jefferson lack. So 24% are below the poverty line with an average family income of $9,300. So almost 67% are Pell Grant eligible. And so this is not a small number of students. It is, as you can see, the majority of our students here at Jefferson. The Pell Grant is based on living wage as opposed to the poverty level. So living wage is defined at about $31,500 for a family of 4.
Non-farm family.
Non-farm. Barbara's a sociologist, so. Okay, next. The median family income at Jefferson for our students is $23,000, which is about 1/3 of the median family income for students at the University of Kentucky. You can see there is a vast difference in terms of economic resources between our student population and that at some of the universities around the state. Our average household income for the FAFSA applicants at Jefferson is $16,000. And again, is that family of 4, Barbara? Or just in general?
Yeah, they do not do that.
Okay.
But that's going to be skewed because people with higher incomes don't always fill out a FAFSA.
Correct.
That's true. That's
A lot of the upper middle class there, because we do have some of those.
because that's the FAFSA applicants. Our current graduation rate, for anyone who happened to be at the faculty meeting when this was the first time, I think there was a collective intake of breath in the room. We're looking at about 12, 13%. Now that is not drastically different than the national, but I think for a long time, we focused on getting students in the door, and we really didn't talk about getting them out the door as completers very much. And so this was really an eye-opening moment when we began, through Achieving the Dream, to grapple with our graduation rate and student success. Are we ready for you?
I think we are.
Now Barbara's going to do all the hard work.
Well, I just wanted to talk briefly, after I get all of my clips in place. Let me keep one of those. About class differences. Typically, as Sherry said, I teach sociology. And typically what we talk about, things like the kinds of jobs people do, the kinds of neighborhoods they live in, their salary ranges, things like that, when we talk about class. However, you're receiving a sheet here which looks at class a bit differently. It looks at how people look at various things, and it divides the classes into three basic ones: wealthy, middle class, and the poverty class. And if you would look on the back page, the one that has the source on it, you see something called driving forces. We are very familiar, especially in an institution of higher education, with driving forces like work. We measure ourselves in terms of our achievements. We are constantly planning how we're going to get through the week, how we're going to get to spring break, how we're going to get through the term, constantly with a future orientation. So that comes very natural to us because of our backgrounds and because of the institution in which we work, which requires that. If you look at the driving forces for those in the poverty class, they're quite different. Poverty, and we know that about a quarter of our students are actually in the poverty class. Whether this is generational or episodic poverty, we do not know. We also know that a large chunk of our students are just above the poverty class in what sociologists would term the working class. And so these attributes exist on a continuum. It's not when you make $1 more per year and you move from poverty to working class that suddenly your whole life changes. So all of these attributes on a continuum. And many of our working class students, you're going to find, have these same driving forces. First and foremost, survival. Survival on a day-to-day basis. How many of you went to the poverty simulation that we ran here last year? Yes, we had, if you recall, a poverty simulation in which people were assigned roles. You were a mother, a member of a family, you had a job, you didn't have whatever, your whole life was defined. And your job was to exist through the simulation. Most of our highly educated, very professional, future thinking and future planning, very clever staff and faculty ended up in jail because they could not cope in that kind of circumstance. Nothing in life prepared us for having to grapple with agencies, having to find transportation, having to figure out what to do with a child when school was called off and we had to work or we weren't going to get paid. So the poverty simulation, I think, was a real eye-opener for a lot of people. I know Sherry did one at New Horizons, and you want to tell us about that?
It was eye-opening for me. I was not able to participate in the one here, but by the end of the 2 hours or however long, I was a single mother with children who had managed to lose. I lost my job. I was at the brink of losing my children, And I'll tell you, I was so angry that if somebody had looked at me crosswise, I probably would have slugged them. And that is not my nature, but it certainly gave me insight into some of the frustrations that our students might experience as they deal with agencies and live the kind of life that is focused on, okay, how do I get through today? One thing before you go on, Barbara, is that in all of this, we are talking about patterns of behavior, so there are always exceptions. We're not trying to stereotype here, but these are the patterns that have emerged in this research.
Exactly. Different life circumstances create different skill sets. And so the skill set needed in the poverty class is something we do not have and did not do well with. We failed. And we believe that many of our students coming from an under-resourced background walk into here and it's like landing on Mars because it's a very different orientation, very different expectations, very, very different codes of behavior. So in poverty, first and foremost, is survival. Dealing with the agencies, being able to know what to do when you are evicted and where do you go and do you have a car to live in or do you have relatives you can go to. Relationships are critically important because you are not calling AAA when your car breaks down. You are calling Uncle Ray. You are very dependent on other people to help you to survive. So relationships are critical. And entertainment. You say, what is entertainment doing in that? Why would you be entertaining yourself in the midst of all of this? Well, as Sherry pointed out, stress level is very high in a very uncertain circumstance. And so entertainment is a means of relieving that stress, of making yourself sane, of making yourself capable of going on and doing something the next day. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of the backdrop here. And I want to talk a little bit, actually I'm going to start out telling you a story. And it sounds like an odd thing to do when you're talking about planning and organizing. But y'all know the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Y'all know that one? Okay. And there's Little Red. And it goes something like this. One day, Little Red Riding Hood's mother said to her, take this basket of goodies to your grandma's cottage, but don't talk to strangers on the way. Promising not to, Little Red Riding Hood skipped off. On her way, she met the big bad wolf who asked, where are you going, little girl? To my grandma's, Mr. Wolf, she answered. And then what happens? Then what?
Doesn't he eat her? The wolf.
Does the wolf eat Little Red Riding Hood?
No, he takes her there, hides his grandma.
The woodsman comes, saves the day, right?
And the woodsman comes and saves the day. And Little Red gets very suspicious when she starts saying, Grandma, what big ears you have. Grandma, what big eyes you have. And finally, Grandma, what big teeth you have. And then Red has got a clue and she's out of there. So had a very happy ending. That is how we heard the story. I want to tell you the story differently. And where are we here in the story?
The woodsman has come and killed the wolf.
We're at the end of the story. And that is because this story is, that we're about to tell you, is in casual register. And
Barbara, I saw this dog on the side of the road the other day that looked like that wolf.
Sherry, you need your glasses changed. Well, you know, everything turned out okay for that Little Red Riding Hood and her granny, too. But for a little while there, I was just sure that nasty old wolf was going to have them both for his dinner. That wicked old wolf with his...
For dinner tonight?
Wolf.
Okay.
I'm having Wolf to dinner. Wolf is my cat. Yes. That wicked old wolf with his big old sharp teeth and sneaky ways. Oh, I sure would hate to have him chasing me. When Red was walking through those woods and that old wolf came along and started talking to her, well, I was just wondering why her mother would let her go into the woods by herself and why didn't she tell her not to talk to strangers?
The woods are scary.
Woods are very, I was a girl, woods are very scary. Cute little thing like her and all dressed up in that bright red cloak and hood and everything, looking sharp and just sticking out like a sore thumb, just bound to attract attention from some nasty old wolf prowling in the woods, just looking for trouble to get into.
Sometimes it's better to just
be on the down low and blend in. You know, not have red cloak going through the woods.
You mean like this red sweater? Is that what you're trying to tell me? Okay. All right, I got a black coat that goes over this, however. Okay, so you see the difference here? Same story.
You're telling me backwards.
We started at the end. And let me just put some of that story up for you. Started at the end. Anything else that you noticed? We progressed. We kept applying back to what we kept insinuating ourselves into the story with my cat Wolf and some dog she saw and roadkill and all of that kind of stuff.
Your red shirt.
And my red shirt. Anything else you noticed? Was it linear? Not particularly. We're telling stories like little vignettes. We're talking about the wolf. We're making comments on Little Red Riding Hood's mother. We're talking about this, and this. They're related, but not in the same way the words were in the first story. It's not linear. And this is what is known as casual story structure or casual discourse. So the discourse pattern that we are all quite used to is the formal discourse pattern. It is linear. We start at the beginning. Little Red is leaving her mother's house. And it's kind of, let's get down to business. Let's go from point A to point B to point C, and let's get to the end. So it's a linear, logical progression, isn't it? The casual discourse pattern is more like this. You start with what you think is emotionally most powerful. You use your best hook to get people's attention. Remember, entertainment is a large part of the poverty class. And so I want you to love me. I want you to think I'm entertaining. I want you to look at my red sweater. I want you to listen to what I'm saying. And I, most of all, want to get your attention right off the bat and engage you. So if I start talking about blood and guts, and boy, she's lucky she wasn't blood and guts, the way that story proceeded, then you were more likely to pay attention. Remember Bethany Tucker talking about having a house full of kids and a mom that was very busy, and in order to get that mother's attention, you started with something really powerful, something really impactful, and that's part of the reason for this story structure. So what this is about is not so much let's get down to business, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, here we're done. It is about relating. It is about making comments and expressing your values along the way. There are little vignettes and little morals built into this story structure. It's more like that than like a straight line. It is relational. It is based on emotions. And again, being able to relate to what's going on. So that is very different, and that is the discourse pattern of the poverty class to a large extent. Did you ever have a student come in and start at the end of something and then get to the middle and then go back near the end and then possibly get to the beginning? Did you ever have that experience?
And there's a lot of theys in a student story. They told me to come here to do this. Who are they and what is this?
Exactly. And remember, in casual register is a much more limited vocabulary. So they, I don't know who those people were, and I wasn't that interested to find out. They're nothing to me.
Where were they and why did they send you here?
Yeah, it can very much be non-specific.
In that other building.
Exactly. Exactly right. So if you do this, it's not students being grammatically incorrect, it's students using the language pattern that they have learned and that they use. And they continue to use with their families, in their neighborhoods, with their friends. So, casual register. Anybody else a fan of Breaking Bad? Yes.
Bitches.
Jesse Pinkman. Jesse Pinkman, the meth cook and the meth head, is a perfect illustration of casual register. And when he talks to Walter White, the ex-high school biology teacher, he's a perfect example of formal And you wonder how they communicate at all, and they
Was
don't.
anyone else disappointed that Mr. White never talked him into going to community college?
Oh.
It was very disappointing to me. It would have been a different ending, very different ending.
Exactly right. So, okay, get off my back, yo. That's Jesse. That's casual register. And this is a language pattern that you might use between, I mean, you can use it. It's used between friends. It's not that you're incapable of using it. It's just that you don't use it, say, in front of a class or when you're talking to your minister. So, it's usually a 400 to 800 word vocabulary. Tends to be general, just like Lisa is saying, the theys and the thems and the he's and the, you know, don't bother with anything too specific. A lot of nonverbal assists. So because the vocabulary is fairly limited here, you are relying on facial expressions, on body language, on the color of your sweater, whatever you can latch onto to assist you in communicating, because you don't have a huge menu of words from which to choose, and the sentence syntax is often incomplete. So it is not unusual to have sentence fragments if they're powerful, if they fit into the story. So again, that is very different than what we're used to and what we require of students here. Now, language is one of the things that helps us to organize our thoughts. So the words that we have, the vocabulary that we have, the sentence structure that we use, the rules of grammar, if we know them, are all the means by which we're able to communicate, and it reflects how we're thinking. So, if you're informal, you go beginning to end, chronological, linear. It's very sequential. Red leaves her house, Red's carrying a basket, Red goes into the woods, meets the wolf, straight in a line like that. And the emphasis is on the plot, building the plot right to the end of the story. Casual, as we said. First, you tell a lot of little kind of related stories. It's episodic. There's audience participation expected. That's how you know they're listening to you and they're engaged. Characterization is emphasized. You heard a pretty good description of that wolf. If you go to the end of the story, you get to a pretty good comments about, well, you heard some comments about Red's mother. So a lot of characterization, emphasis on the people, emphasis on the relationships. And it ends with a statement about character. So that is the emphasis there. Lisa, go ahead.
Barbara, I'm wondering if there's also a generational aspect here. To me, formal sounds an awful lot like a printed newspaper, and casual sounds a lot like the internet. You know, just random clicks going in different directions.
There is that aspect too, and we're not sophisticated enough to try to tie this yet to millennial generation. But I am convinced that certainly some of our students, even though they're middle class, do have some of the same characteristics. I don't know if it's a consequence of click or what it's a consequence, or schooling or what. But what we do know, that if your way of speech, your way of organizing your thoughts is a random, episodic story structure, and that's how you form your memory patterns, then that's what you try to put new information into, right? Not linear, not plot-like, not sequential, none of those things. You live... Oh, I'm sorry, that's my computer. Ivory, she likes to tell the time. It's 2 o'clock. Speaking of being interactive, right? Everybody gets in the act here. So you live in an unpredictable environment, and you don't necessarily have an abstract replica of reality. You are very concrete. You live in an environment, if any of you were at Bethany's day-long seminars, she showed a film of some people living in a trailer. Tammy, and I forget the son's name. Bo. And Tammy walked several miles to work, and things were very unsettled. They didn't know if they were going to be able to stay in that trailer. Tammy didn't have enough money to get a car fixed. These were people in generational poverty. And so they kind of had to be ready for anything. Had to be ready to be evicted. Had to be ready to pick up and move with all their belongings at a moment's notice. I had a student, very good student, who I gave them an assignment, which was we were studying class, and they were to describe their own class situation. And she described herself as lower class, but on an upswing, because in 2008, and she doesn't go into detail about what happened, she was homeless. And she had 2 kids, and she relied on relatives for as long as they would have her, and then she lived in her car for a while. She is now working 2 or 3 jobs. She got financial aid. She is getting some government help, et cetera, et cetera. So she has been able to stitch that all back together. But that is the kind of environment we are talking about. You better have some pretty good reactive skills, but that makes you very concrete. You're responding to very concrete kinds of situations. And if that is the way in which your life is structured, then you have difficulty planning. Because why would you think about the past when right now the present is so important? I got to be ready to move. I got to figure out what to put on the table tonight. I got to figure out how I'm going to get my kid out of jail. And the future, you don't have time to plan for the future, and you don't have the resources to do it anyway. So, go ahead.
Just an example for those of us who teach the FYE class, we do this financial literacy module, and we had a module that was structured by the Federal Reserve Bank. Some of us taught this last semester. And one of the things that struck me about it, there was a lot of focus on saving money. And, you know, I had this group of students, and I suspect maybe 10% of the students, maybe, in the class were financially situated to even think about saving money. And certainly was the place that most of them functioned. And so, but I know as a person who grew up in middle class, maybe I didn't do it, but it was always something that my parents talked about. So that very different ability to plan, in this case, with money.
Or I don't know if it's, I'm talking about the dark ages. I don't know if kids still get allowances. I got this particularly slim allowance, but I was always told, okay, you save it up, and in 18 years, you'll be able to buy a bicycle or something.
6 years, you can buy a candy.
Exactly. But you don't find that in this environment, so it's a very different place. So if you can't plan, you're not accustomed to it, if that is not your thought pattern or your life experience, it's very difficult for you to predict what's going to happen if you do X, Y, or Z. If you can't predict, you can't identify cause and effect. That's a tough one. That's abstract. That's an abstract concept of time. If you cannot identify cause and effect, you can't identify the consequences, even of your own actions many times. If you cannot identify consequences, you have a hard time controlling impulsivity. Think Jesse Pinkman. If you don't have the linear, logical, abstract kind of model from which to work, and what you have are the reactive, emotional kinds of skills that you have honed in order to survive in your environment, then what do you use? You use what you've got, obviously. And if you're mad, or if you're scared, or if you're depressed, or whatever, you're going to act from here, aren't you? From your gut, because you have no other way to choose. So you're going to go with what's powerful. And very frequently, those are your emotions, and you're going to act impulsively. And so frequently you will act based on immediate feelings rather than thoughts. I heard a counselor, I thought this was brilliant, talking to a very distressed student, and she said, you're thinking with your gut, because I could hear the student in very emotional tones talking about her predicament. And that's exactly what was going on. But without helping the student to develop a model for planning, just saying you're thinking with your gut doesn't really help. Yeah, okay, I'm thinking with my gut, so what should I be thinking with is kind of the response to that.
One of the things that kind of clicked for me with this, in the library, you know, sometimes we deal with behavioral problems, and in the past, when somebody started to escalate, we would say something like, you know, you need to calm down, or stop doing this, or we're going to have to send you to the dean of students. Well, for someone who has that ability to do the future orientation, you know, for me, it's like, okay, if I get sent to the dean of students, there are going to be consequences. I might get kicked out of school, and then if I get kicked out of school, then, you know, I'm not going to, whatever. And you can see that whole progression. But if you don't normally think in that pattern, then getting sent to the dean of students is like, so what?
Teach the cops.
And so
exactly.
But it never struck me in the past that what is really a threat to me is perhaps not a threat at all. It has no meaning to some of our students.
It absolutely does not. We know that many people from poverty do not think abstractly. They think concretely. Again, not because they're stupid, but because of their circumstances. You know, there was an NFL combine going on last week, where all those young men were out on the field running relays and catching things and jumping, and they had fabulous reactive skills, and they better have them if they get chosen for the NFL, or they're going to be a little splat to the ground. So it's not that those are not valued resources. They're going to make a whole lot more than you and I are going to make in our lifetimes, all of us combined. However, those kinds of skills are not thinking or planning abstractly. And that is very much what is required in college. So when models for an abstract concept like time or planning are provided, then abstract information can be learned much more quickly and retained because the mind has a way to contain it and hold it. Many of our students don't have a container. They don't have an abstract model of time or space, for that matter. Theirs is very concrete. My sister, for example, she's older than I am, which is like ancient, and to this day she cannot read a map. It's an abstract, yes, it's an abstract replica.
This street doesn't look like that.
Exactly, that street.
Street's blue.
That's right, this is blue, that street's orange, we don't have any of those here. So, you know, it's very concrete thinking. So, let's just kind of summarize here. Survival in poverty, very concrete, very sensory dependent, reactive, often nonverbal. Environment is unpredictable, memory patterns are based on episodic story structure, and there is no abstract replica of reality. Survival at school and work is very different, isn't it? It is based on abstract, verbal, linear kinds of thoughts with a view to the future. Next, we're going to do this. At the end of term, we're going to have a final. So planning is required. And decontextualized information, stuff that's in a book that has nothing to do with you, has something to do with dead people 100 years ago, in the case of a history book, for example. That is what we are valuing here, and we're testing students on that information, and we must. I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing that. I'm simply saying there's a gap between what we do and what the kids, what many of our students are used to. So we need to be the ones to be bilingual, to understand different dialogue structures, and to be able to bridge that gap, because the students are in no position to do that. So we want to help them bridge from the concrete to the abstract. I just took this. Let's see, Lisa, you've been in a book talk, haven't you, with the green books? I just took this right out of Understanding and Engaging. We've done a number of book talks now, which are book discussion groups based on this particular text, which deals with under-resourced students in higher education specifically. So a lot of times, and you and I know this, the information that academic staff and faculty have we take for granted. We all assume the same thing. We get reinforced on a daily basis. And that's part of the rules, hidden rules of the middle class. We don't think of them as specific rules to our culture. We think of them.
In these trainings, people in the library would often say things like, they don't even know how to act in a library. What's wrong with these people? They've never been in there. Why would anybody know how to act in a library unless their parents took them?
And that's part of it. Everybody should know how, because everybody grew up just like me, right?
Use a library.
Right.
This person maybe has only started using a library this year.
Exactly right. So the assumption is sometimes made, and this is kind of funny, that students come to the instructional setting not only with prior knowledge, but also with the thinking skills, the know-how, and the desire to delve deeply into the learning and into the learning process, both inside and outside the classroom. We all use our own experience as kind of the model of what our students are. So, yes, Lisa.
I think that whole idea about esteeming education is very much a middle class concept. That's the way you achieve your goals. That's the way you move in whichever direction you want to go. And so to think that just because they're here means that they feel the same way that we do about education, I think is a misnomer. Now, you know, there may be many reasons why they come, and I do think some of them are headed in that direction. But, you know, I think that's a huge underlying assumption. Yes. Just because they came here means that they want out of education what we want to give them.
Well, and it also is an assumption that they understand education. So I had an advisee. I said, well, what is your major? What do you think your major is going to be? Well, either I want to be a hairdresser or a brain surgeon.
Either way, it wants to be something to do with the head.
One inside, one outside. One gets tips, the other one doesn't. But in her mind, there was no difference. Those were both things you went to school for, and you got some sort of credential, and you got a job out of that. So very frequently, I mean, when there is no intergenerational transfer of knowledge, your first generation college, who is going to tell you these things? You're going to learn them on your own. It's trial by fire for you. So even if they do want to be here and they do want the education, they're not, many of them, really sure what the education means.
Well, and I think what you said about, you know, they directly connect education with jobs. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that there's a whole lot more to it than just that straight linear travel, you know, to the job. And sometimes I think they get discouraged if they can't see exactly why what we're doing here directly affects the job that I want, you know, then they can kind of lose interest. And, you know, I don't know how to bridge that gap or how to get them to think longer term, because like you said, that's a limited cognitive process that they have.
Exactly right. So we're going to talk about that. We know that a lot of our students, and it's not just the students from the poverty class or the working class, if you look at their behaviors and you look at how they study. I walk into class on a test day and my good students are sitting there with little note cards, flashcards. We are memorizing definitions because we know you're going to ask us some of those. We're going to spit them back up on the test. So we've had to have long discussions about those definitions. Yes, they're great, but you're meant to do something with those concepts, not just memorize them. So as we're pointing out here, and Lisa just said, we've got a gap here between the world from which a lot of our students come, the world into which they walk, where we expect them to do abstract representational thought, and they are living in a sensory-based environment. And so when we try to communicate with them on an abstract level, and they don't understand on an abstract level, learning is in the head. Failure results. I told you we were talking about class, and I thought I gave a perfectly wonderful explanation of everything having to do with class, and I gave the students a worksheet. And I said, all right, here are the 4 classes that we're going to be talking about, and what I want you to do is I want you to put down the salary ranges, and it had all of this on the paper. And one of the things that on the paper was, you know, the subdivisions within the class. And some of the students were often running, oh yes, the subdivisions within the class. I had 3 of them. Do you mean where they live? They're thinking concretely. But that was good because it gave me a big clue. And so we talked about subdivisions and what that meant. So we just went from where they were. But I would have, I think, before, you know, looking into some of this stuff and understanding a little bit better than I did, would have perhaps been appalled in the past that you don't know what a subdivision abstractly means when it's used on a piece of paper. But they didn't. They told me, we clarified it, and we were able to move on. So, yes, we have to teach them certainly the vocabulary, the content, but we have to constantly be explain to them why this is important to you, whether it's long-term or whether it's right here this minute in this class for this hour and 15 minutes, or in Metro College, or in the advising center, or in SOAR. What does this have to do with you? Because they don't know. They honestly don't know. And then show them how to. Give them the concrete steps how to achieve that. So I'm going to play a little bit of Ruby Payne. Ruby Payne is the founder of the AHA Process Incorporated, who has compiled all of this work on people in poverty. They don't just work in higher education, they work in K-12, they work with community groups, they work in communities as a whole, they work with church groups, they work with businesses. So these same concepts are applicable in a lot of different places, and most of the information that I've got came from, by now, the very famous Bridges Out of Poverty, Ruby Payne's seminal work. This deals a lot with agencies, things like the IRS or the welfare agency, and how those kinds of bureaucracies can be arranged to assist people in poverty. This one, because it speaks more directly, research-based strategies. All of what we're talking about here is obviously based in research, and this is a whole compilation. If a student is showing this kind of issue in not understanding, here are some things you can try. So let me let Ruby talk now, and I will shut up.
Let me give you a specific example for a mental model for time. Time is how you order things, time is how you organize things, but more importantly, time helps you control impulsivity. When you don't have an abstract construct for time, a past, a present, and a future, you can't sequence and you can't do cause and effect. In poverty, you live in the present because the past is too painful, the future is too unpredictable. When you live in the present, you don't learn planning skills. To survive school, you have to have planning skills. Planning skills are based upon procedural self-talk. Procedural self-talk is what you and I use on ourselves in the morning on the way to work. We say, first I gotta do this, then I gotta do this, then I gotta do this, then I gotta do that. That's procedural self-talk. The problem is this: to do that, you have to know the steps. So you have an example here on the screen of a step sheet. I had students who I couldn't even get the directions out of my mouth until they were asking for them again. It made me nuts. So what I did was I made a step sheet. And what a step sheet literally does is it gives them the steps they need to follow to get it done. And I made them check it off. And I put time frames there. Almost all of it. The first step was put your name on your paper. That shouldn't take you more than a minute. And as they did it, they checked it off and crossed it off. It's a mental model for time, and it allows them to develop procedural self-talk. Let me give you a second grade example. In second grade, we had a teacher who drew 4 circles on the blackboard. She Xeroxed off half sheets of paper with 4 circles on it. When the students came in for reading, there was something in each circle on the board that they needed to get done and handed in for reading. They copied that on their own paper. As they got it done, they X'd off each circle. When they had all 4 circles X'd off, then
now that's obviously an example for school, elementary school, I would think. She's talking about a 4th grade reading class here. Do you think that that is too elementary for some of our college students?
I mean, I think if you've never learned to do things step by step, it's not too late to try to learn to do things step by step.
We have a huge cumulative reading project that comes at the very end of the semester. And as you might imagine, you know, this is, especially for students who maybe just barely hang on by a thread, when we...
Can I do it all the last day?
Well, yeah, and with some of them, you're like, okay, what have you got done so far? And it's nothing and nothing and nothing. And so after she talked about the step sheet, I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to create. And I fill out the first 2 or 3 steps, you know, and tell them what day it has to be done. And so, like you said, just check it off. And I could tell a dramatic difference.
Yes.
It was almost like I had relieved a burden, you know, and I said, I did the first 2 or 3 for you. Now you have to fill it in. You know, look at your schedule, what days do you have your free time, you know, and I made them sit down and start filling things in. And, you know, it made that big overwhelming thing that they thought they could never do, all of a sudden become conceivably manageable.
Right, because you chunked it out, you made it concrete, they had some place to objectify.
But I would encourage her to do something like that, you know,
Right.
without her instruction.
Sure, because everybody knows how to plan a project like that, right?
Right.
You would.
I mean, you've been all through high school. Did you have plenty of projects and you know how to do that? But obviously.
Obviously not.
So.
Well, let's take a look at another. And this is Carla Crodel. And you're going to have to remind me again, Sherry, where does Carla Crodel teach?
Youngstown.
Thank you. Youngstown State University. So she does deal with college students, and she is one of the co-authors on the Green Book, Understanding and Engaging, along with Bethany Tucker. And she's talking about something a little different here. It's not classroom. It is helping students to solve problems.
Barbara, can you turn it down a little?
If I can find out.
They're testing next door.
Oh.
So that's what that was about.
I'm not sure where the turn it down is.
Just turn it down your computer.
Okay, well, we could do that.
It's short, it probably doesn't matter. There you go.
Okay.
Topics of under-resourced college students. I want to talk to you today about a strategy I use with my students called putting your cards on the table. 4 cards, real simple. The idea is to help your students understand a problem-solving process, start to use it for themselves, and for you to learn how to help mediate the circumstances that they come into. As I travel around the country, oftentimes I have faculty and staff say that they like their students and they want to help, but when the students come in to talk with them and they've got that tyranny of the moment story, it takes up a lot of time. And so this is a strategy to help you manage your time and help your students get towards solutions faster. 4 steps, 4 cards. First card. The first card, you're asking the student what's going on. So the other day I had a student who came in and she was very upset. There had been a lot of drama in her household going on, and but she had a biology test today, and she hadn't gotten to prepare for it because the last few days had been so chaotic. So as I'm talking to her and I'm listening, I'm hearing things about electricity going off, and it sounds like there could be some violence in the house, and I'm listening to it through my filter, and I'm worrying about those things. But she's worried about the biology test. She has to pass it. So what's going on does 2 things. It helps the student isolate the problem, and it helps me get rid of my filter and understand what's truly happening with my student. Second card, second question is, how do you want it to work out? What do you want to happen? This is critical because it helps your student articulate the need for change. Rather than the student saying, I'm not ready for my biology test, and me saying, let me tell you what you need to do, I'm asking the student, how do you want this to work out? Build that future story, student makes the argument for change. Third card, third question. How have you handled this in the past and who's helped you? Perhaps if it's a first semester, first year college student, they haven't had a lot of experiences in college, but they've had a ton of experience solving problems elsewhere in their life. And this gives them credence for that, helps them realize that they are capable, they have it in them, and they're going to be able to figure this one out too. Who helped you in the past? Who are the people that have your back? They're going to help you get ahead in this situation. So the third part is, what have you done in the past and who's helped you? Fourth and final part is, what do you want to do now? This invites the student to start making a plan. And it gives you the opening to say, you want some help. Not, let me tell you how to fix it, but do you want some help? So this might be things like talking to the student about what's the nature of the relationship with the teacher. Do they have some peer mentors? Can they talk to an advisor? Or is there somebody else that might be able to help them? When do they intend to talk to the professor? Not 5 minutes before the test is going to be given, right? Okay. And what kinds of things? How can you hear? Four questions. Then sit down. People say now that you really need to use that question. I say yes. These are tangible. These are concrete. This lets me see that this problem is made up of pieces of parts. And I have to manage those pieces of parts, and I can get to solve. I hope you find the strategy helpful. I'd love to hear from you if you use it and tell me how it goes. Thank you.
So just like you were saying, Lisa, it breaks down what seems like an insurmountable emotions are all in turmoil problem to manage makes, what she is doing is taking all that emotion, she's making it into thoughts, but she's making those thoughts concrete, literally on little cardboard cards.
So is she like having those questions and the cards and working with the student and they're jotting the information on them?
Right.
Okay. So then the student actually has those cards, you know, to use to initiate whatever action needs to be taken.
Exactly. So she's asking the question, handing the student a card, and letting the student now objectify about each of those things.
One of the things I thought was really interesting about that is she said that she was focused on, you know, the electricity being off and the violence in the household, when in actuality the student wasn't looking for help with that. The student's worried about the biology test. So also helping us put our lenses aside and really focus on what the student's concern is.
And refraining, because I know I want to do this all the time, telling the student what to do. So helping the student to solve the problem. Or to begin to analyze the problem and decide what needs to be done, because that empowers the student. I think in our maternal goodness and paternal goodness, we sometimes want to solve things for students. Oh, here, honey bunny, I know it was terrible here, I'm going to fix it for you. And that's great, because it gets the student out of a scrape, and sometimes they need that too. But in many instances, they don't. They need to learn how to figure out things. And exactly.
You know, so they have to learn, if I ask myself these same questions in these similar circumstances, you know, then this helps me to formulate my own solution.
Exactly. So now they've got a concrete model.
You know, our students, I think they come with so many resources. They may not be resources that we value in this world of higher education, but I think also that process then reinforces for them that they do have problem-solving skills. You know, just like in the poverty simulation, they solve problems every day that many of us are ill-equipped to deal with. And so it helps them, I think as you said, Lisa, look at how they can transfer these skills that I have, these processes I've used before. Oh, okay, I can do this how they fit.
Two rather different kinds of things. One, a classroom, although that could be used any place. The step sheet could be used in advising, it could be used in financial aid, it could be used any place to help students through that process. And then one dealing with emotional problems. One I love that Bethany told us over and over again, because some students don't have a strong sense of time and cause and effect. Say to them, if you choose blank, then you are choosing to. So if you choose not to study, then you are choosing to fail the test. It's your fault, right, that I failed the test. So this is saying, no, these are you. Exactly. That's yes. And one of the things that we see with people in poverty or just not very stable lives is that they don't feel like they have a sense of control, because they don't. And so there's a strong belief in fate, and there's a strong belief that I can't do anything, because many times they can't. I mean, that's rooted in reality. But we want them to know that, yeah, there are some things you can do something about. So I talked to my class about this $8 per credit hour tax that they're talking about doing on the students. And we talked a little bit about that, and they said, well, what can we do about it? Well, first they said they couldn't do anything. And then we talked a little bit, and they said, well, maybe, I don't know. We could try to talk to that student government president, but it probably won't do any good. And I said, well, you know, if someone says you should pay $8.
Who's on the board from this college?
Nobody.
Just Michael, don't we have a student rep? We used to have a student rep.
We do, but it's from Somerset.
Oh, so just Michael Ginsburg is the only rep from Jefferson.
Yes.
So he's who you complained to about the $8 tax.
Well, they didn't even run that by the board yet. So he has, no, they won't. It's a done deal. It's in the legislature.
Your legislature.
Absolutely. So I said, you know, and they said it's not, they kept saying, well, he's not going to listen. I said, well, look, if something is going to happen, and you say something you don't like is going to happen, and you say nothing, what are you saying? We're saying nothing.
Okay. We're saying it's okay.
But it took, you couldn't believe it was like pulling to get that out. You are keeping quiet, and that means either you care or it's okay. So if I give you a bad name and you say nothing, we had to go there. And then that's when we finally got, and now you ought to see them. They are putting stuff on Facebook, they are tweeting. Somebody called Wave TV 3 News. So, but it took a while. It took a while for them to make that connection because they're so used to staying quiet and thinking they can't do anything. So for their sake, in a lot of different ways, I really hope that thing does not pass. So we're talking again about cause and effect. What you do has consequences. Oh, that was a slow cause and effect there. Something simple, and it's a little bit like what you did, Lisa, is saying, okay, your project is due on Friday, look at your schedule, that kind of thing. What are the steps I have to complete in order to have that done by Friday? Simple step sheets, planners like that. This one is in your packet. This, in our very first book talk, we were the pilot, we were the guinea pigs. We were reading the book and making up our discussion questions as we went from the PD committee. And we all came up with various projects, and this was Patty Beebe. She does a lot of advising. And you know the students who come in and they're working 50 hours a week and they've got 3 kids and all these responsibilities, but they got to take 5 hours. I mean, 5 classes, 15 credit hours. They what?
Okay, they don't spend any time with their kids.
Well, so what she did was calculated, look, here's what you've got. You cannot expand the week. It's got 168 hours, so let's start counting. To show them, again, very concretely, what can you expect to get done in that amount of time in a given week that you cannot change. So I've got one more that I'm going to show you, and then if you've got ideas, because we're almost out of time, but I like these ideas. This one is something I've been giving back tests to my students forever and saying to them, okay, not every class does this, but I want you to have these so that you can go back and see what you missed and see what you did well on. And a couple of them did it. Most of them, like that. And so what I did last year was created this, again, very simple post-test review. Questions I knew, or answers that I knew. Things I had a guess on. Things I had no clue about. A question I had no clue about, and what I'm going to do to improve. So again, it broke it down for them. They went through each and every question. One thing they understand very quickly is that they've got to read the whole chapter on which they're going to be tested, instead of just trying to memorize the things in the columns, because they found that they knew the things in the columns because of the flashcards. But oh, I didn't know how to read those pages. So those kinds of very simple things dawned on them. Excuse me?
The chapter test in your class is on every page of the chapter.
Yeah. I mean, they are responsible for knowing the material.
I suppose you ask questions based on lectures too, huh?
Yeah, we do that as well. And not only that, we also have film in the class. We have a lot of film, a lot of hands-on. So yeah, it's the whole package. And they love it. They actually do love it by the end of the term, not necessarily at the beginning. But this helps them, again, it's another concrete way of breaking down and looking at trying to move them to metacognition. Now, does this help all students? No. But when students are having problems, now we have something to work with. So they bring this in. We're able to go back over, okay, let's look at these questions. You know, what do they have in common? But it said this in these exact words here, and on the test it had different words. And what's that telling you? Well, because it's rote memorization. And so if 2 words are out of place, then they think it's the wrong answer because they don't understand the concept. They have rote memorized. But that's important for us to understand about their learning patterns, to be able to talk to them about that. So that's all we've got. But I'd like to hear if anybody has ideas or things that you're using. Lisa has already shared a little bit. If you